So I was drinking some water the other day, and it reminded me of when I was in Chicago. I lived in Chicago back in the 80s, from 85 to 90. As a matter of fact, my first religious science church was the first church of religious science in Chicago. Carlton Whitehead was my first teacher. He was a contemporary of Ernest Holmes. Incredible man. And the thing that I loved, the 5 years that I lived there, was they had great water. The water was delicious. I'd lived in a lot of different places, and I was like, what did they do to this water? Well, it turns out they get their water from Lake Michigan. This huge, huge lake that they are right next to. And so I started doing a little research about Lake Michigan and how they get their water. And I was surprised to learn that way back in the 1800s, 1849 as a matter of fact, there was such a problem because Chicago was growing. It was getting to be a bigger and bigger city. And back then, they did not have sewer systems. So the filth was like running in the streets and the waste, and it was going down into Lake Michigan, and that's where they were getting their water from. And they had a cholera outbreak in 1849. And the city was just like, we're done with this. The citizens rose up and said, you've got to do something, city of Chicago. And so they hired a man by the name of Ellis Chesborough. And Ellis Chesborough was an engineer. And so he looked at the situation and he said, you know what? We have to do two things. Number one, we have to build a way to get the water from 2 miles out and bring that in so then that it's not near the lakefront. And secondly, we have to build an underground sewer system that can treat this runoff. And to do that, we need to raise all the buildings in this city up about 10 feet. Yeah. So they realized that they would have to get jacks and start lifting some of these buildings. And they built, in the 1860s, they built the first sewer system and the first water treatment system in the country, in the city of Chicago. And this was one of the first drawings that Chesborough shared. And you see how he designed on the left side is the lakefront. And they decided they were going to have to build a tunnel 60 feet under the river and go out 2 miles and build this structure. They call it a water crib. And then the water would go down, then across. These pipes, where the water is coming through and getting to shore from way out, a man can stand in them. They're huge. And so they built this. They've now had 9 water cribs. Only 2 of them are still functional. But this was the start of someone who decided to think beyond the problem and find the solution in the unobstructed field. Are you with me? And so I love that analogy that sometimes the solution is there. And as a matter of fact, you can see this is today the water crib 2 miles out from the city. So it's still functioning today. It still goes to this water treatment center, which is right there, the same one that they built in the 1860s. They've, of course, modernized it, but there you see Navy Pier on the right there. It is a functioning system that serves 9.5 million people in the Chicagoland area. And every day, just under 1 billion gallons of water come out of Lake Michigan. And then it goes through the water treatment, and it comes out in people's faucets and their showers. It's an incredible system when I think about it. And I started thinking, I could go down to the shores of Lake Michigan. I could scoop up a cup of water, or if I'm feeling really ambitious, I could put a bucket of water, and I could fill this up, and I could have my bucket of water. Or I could do what the city of Chicago did, And I could have a tunnel as large as a man standing and pull under just under a billion gallons of water every day. The lake doesn't care. It's an inexhaustible supply that is saying, here I am. Take me. Use what you need, because it will be replenished. I love the idea that Dr. Barbara gave us about the apple tree is going to just replenish. Even when there is someone taking away the bushels of baskets of apples there, it's always replenishable. And the universe is like that too, isn't it? We can take a cup, we can take a bucket, or we can take a giant tunnel, tube, and pull out what it is that we need. What's the common denominator? Our consciousness. That's what determines how much we can then receive from the universe. Just like Lake Michigan gets rain and snow and runoff from the other tributaries to replenish it, the universe has this inexhaustible, that's it, an inexhaustible supply that is always waiting and ready for us to partake. And if I take my part, that doesn't mean that Margot doesn't get her part or Jen doesn't get her part. That means that I'm simply receiving that which is there for the taking, and there's plenty for all. I'm not taking anyone else's slice of the pie, because don't we humans like to think that sometimes? Well, if I take mine, then that means someone else can't have theirs. No, just like Lake Michigan, it's inexhaustible. And it's something that I think about quite a bit. Am I willing to move through my limited thinking, my cup-sized thinking, and eventually move up to the bucket, and then eventually move up to where I know the truth of who I am, in that I too can partake of this inexhaustible supply. Ernest Holmes wrote in How to Use the Science of Mind, which is still one of my favorite books of his. He wrote this: "It is though we are dipping up water from a limitless sea. Each day we may use a larger measure, and each day dip up more. The ocean will never become exhausted. As a matter of fact, everything we dip up will again run back into it, only to take a new form." I love that first sentence, or second sentence. Each day we may use a larger measure. The measure is determined by us, isn't it? The measure is only determined by our willingness and our consciousness in receiving that which is already there. Lake Michigan is already there. The universe is already there in its plentiful, abundant form. Everything that we need and desire is already there. Sometimes we have an obstruction that we can't see it. We don't know how to get to it. And that's our job as our consciousness growing, is to remove that obstacle to eventually the place where we can see the unobstructed field out there that is open and available to us. Are you with me? Yes. So each time I start thinking my limited cup-sized thoughts, it's time to break out the bucket and larger, because I know that I'm the blockage. I'm the only reason life isn't coming through me in a fuller fashion. It's totally up to me. And just like Ellis Chesbrough, they still call it the Chesbrough system in Chicago. Just like he said, you've got to raise the buildings. We have to raise our consciousness to get to that place. As a matter of fact, when they raised the buildings, they were able to put the sewer system at ground level. He thought of the idea of manhole covers so that they could go down and maintain the sewer system. The man really thought in a whole new way that no one had ever thought before. And isn't that what it takes for us to rise above the challenges that come our way, to raise our consciousness to a place that sees above and beyond the obstacle that is in our way? When I think about that, about raising my consciousness, I think about another time I was in Chicago. This was more recently. In 2011, I went to a conference there that was about how to build churches. It was called the Meta Model, and it was fabulous. I took my whole board with me. I was the minister of the church in Columbia, Maryland at the time. And we had a wonderful time. We were there for several days. And the last day, we finished up in the afternoon with a conference, and we had scheduled a cab to pick us up to take us to O'Hare Airport. O'Hare was about an hour away in Chicago time. Because with traffic, when you live in a big city, it's not how many miles, right? It's how long. And so we knew that, okay, we have to have the cab here at whatever time it was to go make our flight. So we finish up, we walk outside, we're waiting on the sidewalk, cab doesn't show. So we call the cab company. Well, they're coming. They're running a little bit late. Now we start to worry because we're thinking, planes do not wait. So one of my board members said, let's treat for the cab to get here. Let's treat. We know that, we're going to get there. And I said, that's fabulous. And if you're new to us, treat is our word for prayer. And so I said, that's great, but what if we treat that we are able to easily, effortlessly, and conveniently get to O'Hare in a timely fashion? We don't care if it's that cab. Someone could say, hey, I'm going that way. I could give you a ride. Someone could say, hey, my private helicopter's right over here. Would you like a ride? Right? I didn't need to define the form. I just needed to know that it would be done. So we treated. We stood there and held hands in a circle right on the sidewalk and did our prayers. And 10 minutes later, my assistant was out and she was like looking, and all the cabs that were coming by had people in them. So there was nothing available for us to even get. But she's looking down and she sees this white limousine, just like this white limousine coming. And she goes, Reverend Sally just said, doesn't matter how we get there, right? So she flags the limousine down, and he pulls over, he's empty, and she says, we need a ride to the airport, and I can pay you this amount, which is what we had said we were going to pay the cab. And the driver of the limousine said, hop in, I'll take you. And so she runs over and she goes, that limo driver's going to take us for the same price as the cab. Let's go. And we grabbed our bags, jumped in, and for the next hour, we had a wonderful, comfortable, convenient ride to O'Hare. Got there in plenty of time. And that was a wonderful demonstration for me to understand that even when I'm willing to see past the obstacle, I have to know that the form doesn't matter. How it shows up doesn't matter. As long as I'm totally clear about what it is that I need to get done. Chicago has been very good to me, given me lots of wonderful lessons. And I see that when I think, how am I limiting my thinking? How am I moving to a place that is cup size instead of bucket and beyond? One of my wonderful teachers had this to say, don't let your good get in the way of your better. And too many times I've let that happen. Have you? I've let my good get in the way of my better because I'm thinking, well, it's just fine. This way is just fine. And the universe is waiting to give me a giant tunnel-sized funnel of fun. And I'm going, no, the bucket's fine, thank you. And so this is where I have to expand and open to the opulence, and I use that word very intentionally, the opulence of the universe. We can't even count the grains of sand on a beach. We can't count the stars in the sky, the leaves on the trees. The universe is naturally abundant. And so are we, if we yet recognize that that is of which we are participating, and we're willing to receive the bounty that is always coming to us and through us. And this is where I get caught sometimes. Sometimes I start thinking, I have to fix things before I know the truth. Do you know what I'm talking about? I have to fix myself in order to get to the truth. I love what Janine Roth, I ran across this recently. She said, if we think our job here on earth is to fix ourselves, we will keep looking for the broken places. If we believe our job is to be kind, we will keep lavishing love on ourselves. Isn't that great? So I think, what is my job? What do I think is my job here? My job isn't to fix myself. My job isn't to fix certainly anyone else. I got enough to worry about with just me. But if I know my job is to show up as love, is to be a beacon of light in the midst of whatever darkness I may be in the middle of, if I know that's my job, it doesn't matter what the forms around me are taking. This is a real shift that I've had to work on consistently, because I think our culture here is always, what do I have to fix? How do I have to improve? The whole self-improvement industry is based upon that, right? Just buy this book, just take this seminar, just take this class. And yet, if we truly know the truth of ourselves, that there is nothing to fix, there is nothing to be healed, only that which needs to be revealed, the inner splendor is already there waiting to come forth. This is a huge shift that I've had to really accept. There's a wonderful book called Risk Forward. The author of it is Victoria Labalme. Now, Victoria had been an actress, and she's now a professional speaker, and she goes out and talks to companies all over the world, basically. But she wrote in her book, Risk Forward, how in her earlier days, back in the 80s, she formed this collective. It was called the PAC, which stands for the Performing Arts Collective. And she was in New York City, and she opened it up to artists, to writers, to performers of all kinds, because she wanted to create a place where it was safe for them to come and have free expression without somebody squashing their ideas. So she created this thing called the PAC, Performing Arts Collective. And in those early days, this guy named Chris Wink managed to find her and join the collective. And she said Chris was an unusual guy because Chris's wish, he'd been looking for a group like this that would support him in his kind of avant-garde way of thinking. And so he expressed to the group, you know, what I'd really like to do in my craziest, wildest dreams, what I'd really like to do is shave my head so I'm bald, paint myself blue, and walk around New York City and see what people think. And the collective was like, yeah, okay. So he tells his friend, one of his best friends was Matt Goldman, who was a software engineer at the time. And he kind of expected Matt to say, well, that's kind of weird, or maybe give a little chuckle. But he said, this is what I want to do, Matt. And Matt said, that sounds cool. Let's go do that. And so from that, in 1987, the Blue Man Group was formed. They found a third partner, Phil Stanton, who was totally on board with that idea. And they started very small to go out and perform in these little tiny venues, which then grew larger and larger. Do you know today, the Blue Man Group is in residence in Las Vegas, Austin, Chicago, all kinds of places, even in Europe. They perform all the time. So obviously there's more than 3 Blue Men now. They actually have auditions. If you go to their website, you can audition to be a Blue Man. It takes quite a long time to learn how to be a Blue Man. And so they built this huge industry, so much so that in 2017, Cirque du Soleil bought them. And Cirque du Soleil said, this is a fantastic idea, because they were doing really wild things. Millions of people have seen them by now and have been inspired. But think about it. If someone had said to Chris Wink, you need to fix yourself, Blue? Come on, get real. But fortunately, he didn't. He stayed and found his tribe with people who said, go for it. And he was able to express so fully. The universe said, here's the support that you need. And he grew it to this astonishing, huge impact on the world. The world is a better place now because the Blue Man Group is inspiring people all over the world. And I think sometimes, how many times have I squashed that little idea maybe that I had? Oh, people won't, that's just too wild. That's too out there. The power of our belief in ourselves. Do we really believe this stuff that we talk about? Do we really believe that we have access to an unlimited universe that totally supports us in everything that we need and desire? Sometimes it takes a lot of strength to stand firm in that conviction, doesn't it? And yet that's what we're here to do. That's what we are here to decide on a huge scale, that what we are here to do is to make a difference on this planet and to be that light, to be that love, to be the smile in the grocery store. Well, now with masks, that's kind of hard, but you get the idea. To be that which is so needed here. The world needs our consciousness now more than ever to rise above the limited static that we're faced with day in and day out. Don't do this, can't do this. Let's rise to a higher level. Let's rise. I'm so glad the Blue Man Group rose. So the power of your belief is everything. It's everything. See, my only job, I figured this out a long time ago, and I honestly wish I hadn't figured it out sometimes because it's hard to stay clear about this. There goes my cup. It's hard to stay clear about this. My only job is to grow my consciousness. Are you with me? That's the only reason I'm here. And fortunately, I recognized that very early, that I was responsible for that. I was responsible for making way for the expansion of my consciousness at every opportunity available. And I've tried very hard not to squelch that desire. Ernest Holmes calls it the divine urge that we have. It's always moving us upward and forward. So Ernest, back to him again, he says, we can make bigger buckets. We cannot make a bigger law. The law knows nothing about big and little. It knows to do. It knows to do. So how big is your bucket? How big do you want to expand and grow and transform yourself and thus this world? I'm going to end with a wonderful allegory that really brings that all together. And it's a story about some animals in the forest. And one day the forest caught fire, and it was a bad fire. The forest was going up in flames, and all the animals started running away from the fire because they just had to leave their homes. It was devastating everything. And a jaguar was one of the animals that was running. And as he was running, he looked up and he saw something coming towards all the animals that were running away from the fire. He saw this little bird. It was a hummingbird. And it was coming, and it flew right over him. And he's like, why is the hummingbird going into the fire? And a few minutes later, the hummingbird, zoom, was right over his shoulder again, out of the fire. And then that happened several times. And the jaguar said, why is the hummingbird doing that? So he decided to ask. When the hummingbird was headed back, he said, hummingbird, why are you doing that? Why are you going into the fire? And the hummingbird said, I'm going to the lake. I'm filling my little beak with as much water as I can hold, and I'm flying back, and I'm putting that water on the fire. And the jaguar said, are you crazy? Your little beak, you think you can put out a fire of that size with just your little beak? And the hummingbird said, no, I know that I can't, but the forest is my home. It's nurtured me and helped me grow. It's where I pollinate flowers. I have to do my part in this. So I know it's not much, but I'm taking this water and I'm trying to put the fire out. At that moment, the elders of the universe heard the hummingbird say that. And they decided, you know what? Let's send a torrential downpour, and the downpour put out the fire. A miracle a miracle happened. And Native American grandmothers tell their grandchildren this story. And then they always conclude it with this: do you want to attract miracles into your life? Do your part. Do your part. So, how big is your bucket? Are you ready to grow your consciousness so that you are doing your part? You will never know how one wave of love that you send out is going to be going on and on and on. We never know. Love is never wasted. No energy in this universe is ever wasted. So let's put our energy. Let's grow that consciousness. Let's see beyond the obstacle to the unobstructed field, that unlimited potential that the universe always has there for us. You are a divine miracle. Let's be that this week. Namaste.